Welcome everyone to Male Fuzz TV. I am Peter, and I'm going to be reviewing episode 1 of season 1 of Gen V. It's a brand new show from Amazon Prime. It is a spin-off to The Boys. I will start spoiler free. Okay, well, I'll do a little spoiler free. It feels weird because it's a spin-off, so it's not a brand new thing. But I'll do a little spoiler free talk, and then I'll just go into what happened in the episode. But yeah, so The Boys is very good. The Boys was a very surprisingly solid show, which I've only honestly loved more as it's went on. Season 3, I think, was its best season in a lot of ways, and I'm always impressed by the good effects, the great balance between the edgy stuff that it's doing, but also the heart that it has, so its tone juggling's very good, all that stuff. Excellent. So obviously I was interested in a potential spin-off, and here we are with Gen V, which is a university, set at a university with nothing but soups. This is like the prestigious university they try and go to maybe one day go to the 7 and things like that. So very hopeful, of course, but there's no guarantee that the spin-off's going to be as good, of course. So you go on with an open mind and hope for the best and see how it is. So this first episode's called Godju. That's right, the university is called Godju. It's short for something, that's the abbreviation, but they clearly picked this so they could call it Godju, because all these little shits think they're gods, when Homelander certainly does, and some of these characters might end up too. So we'll talk about the characters we've got here, some of the plot points that it sets up, and just sort of the general quality of the show. I mean, I think it's a good first episode. I don't think it's a perfect first episode, and the main thing I think holding it back for me a little bit, and this isn't a huge concern going forward, because actually some of these starts of other seasons of The Boys had this problem as well, is that the first couple of episodes were a bit slow. And I've only watched the first episode. I'll be reviewing 2 and 3 later on, mainly just because I only had time to watch 1, and I won't get another chance to watch 1 till Sunday, I don't think, so I just thought it'd be worth putting out the review of the first episode. This one definitely has a bit of a lax pacing, certainly in the middle or so of the episode. I think the opening's really strong, I think the ending's really strong, but some of the stuff in the middle is a little bit plodding. It's a little bit sort of, you're kind of waiting for it to get to the big moments. But the positives is that this episode does show that it's got its good effects from The Boys. You know, I reviewed the Expendables 4 over on Male Fuzz Movies. In fact, that should be going out today when this goes out. That movie has some of the worst visual effects and green screen stuff that I have seen in a movie. And a lot of movies are kind of really shady when it comes to their effects these days. And I've always been impressed with The Boys because all the ridiculous things they do tend to look quite good, especially by TV standards. And hell, I don't even think you have to qualify it by saying by TV standards. It just looks good, by and large. In this episode, I think shows that, both in sort of gory moments, but even in, and this is another thing that it brings over from The Boys, is some of the ridiculous stuff that it does with some of the characters with powers and effects. I'll just say there's something involving a penis this episode that will probably stick in your mind for quite some time. So that stuff all carrying over is great, and I do think some of the things they set up are a little intriguing. I do like a couple of the characters. Some of them I still need to kind of get to know a bit, I think, before I feel anything particularly one way or the other about them. You know, a group of college-age kids who only care about partying and doing drugs is not exactly the most appealing group of characters to me, by and large. But there are a couple. The main one, Marie, our main character, she's obviously kind of the goody two-shoes. She's the one who is there to prove herself. We start off the story with a flashback for her. So this is the character we really get into, played by Jazz Sinclair, who was on The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. But we get her as the focal point. We get her roommate, Emma, who I was a little worried about early on in the episode, because I thought, oh, her thing's just going to be that she does a lot of crude jokes. She's making a lot of sex references, and I thought that could become grating and just kind of like, you know, overly edgy for the sake of edgy. But my pleasant surprise was that as the episode went on, I think they did probably the most interesting things with any character, with the way they use what they set up with her, how she talks and how she presents herself, to then showing her more kind of nuanced moments later on. It actually gave her, I think, more layers and more of an interesting character analysis. The main character's solid, but the main character stuff so far is, you know, it's like it's good, but it's a bit more sort of typical and straightforward, at least in the sense that we have to understand like what she's trying to do by proving herself, why she cares about doing this, her sad backstory, all that stuff. You know, it's a bit more typical protagonist stuff. Whereas the roommate Emma, it feels like there's something a bit more interesting to her, just in terms of how it's challenging her views on kind of sex, and you think she's this confident character, but maybe there's more to her than that. And I'll get into it more in spoilers, but I was kind of impressed by her. Everyone else is just kind of, you know, they seem fine so far, and all I mean by that is that I don't feel attached to them yet, but at the same time, they also all give good performances as actors. That none of them feel out of place in the world that they're presenting. So we have kind of a character literally named Golden Boy, who's like the one who's destined to be in the Seven. He's got like Human Torch style powers. We have Andre, who has, I don't know if it's just straight up telekinesis or if it's something a little more specific, but he does move things around with his mind. And then we have Kate, who's Golden Boy's girlfriend, who seems to have powers of persuasion that needs touch. So she touches someone and says, hey, you know, basically, it's the Jedi main trick, but you just have to touch someone to do it. That's basically what she's got going on. And then we have Jordan, who, and I guess I'll be saying they a lot for this character, because this is a character who can switch between male and female seemingly relatively easily. And then there's an interesting quirk to their power in that whenever, so I'm not sure the exact rules of this yet, but the impression I was getting from the scenes that the two Jordans are in this episode, or the one Jordan that's switching between the two, is that at the moment of transition, when they switch between female when they switch between male and female, or vice versa, it seems like in that moment, that like second where it switches, right, where the body switches over, they're like completely invulnerable. So an example early on in the episode, so this isn't too much of a spoiler, is that someone fires a gun at them and they switch as the bullet's hitting them, and they sort of treat it like a quick draw style moment, and it's almost like that's what stopped them from being hurt. Now I'm not sure if that's actually what they need to do to be invulnerable, but that's the kind of the way I was reading it based on that, and then a later scene. I'm sure they'll further clarify this as it goes on, and probably have done in episodes 2 and 3, which I'll get to. But I mean, but I will say this: that is maybe the most well, that's not true actually. I think this power, and one of the things that Marie, the main character, has going is that I do think her power is really cool too. So I think the Jordan power is really interesting and can make for very different fight sequences and very different uses of powers. I think Marie's power, which we find out in the episode, is that she can control blood. So she has telekinesis, but only for blood. That's very interesting, especially how it comes up. So interesting set of characters. So I think the roommate and Marie, the main girl, are kind of the ones that I probably like the most. I think Jordan's got a really interesting power set, and then the others, I'm kind of waiting to see if they grow on me a little bit. They're kind of just typical college kids, but at the very least, the performances feel very comfortable and natural so far. No one feels like they're bringing the show down. So as far as the first episode goes, that's pretty solid stuff. And we have some cameos, of course, from the boys, which I'll talk about in a bit. But that is the makeup of the main cast for now. I think there is someone else that isn't really in this episode, or at least not much. I don't think I noticed him anywhere. Character named Sam. He's on the poster, which is why I know he's probably a main character. He was also at the end of the first episode. There's like this season on Gen V kind of like sizzle reel. And there was this character in there that I don't think I really noticed in this episode. So I don't know if he's not shown up yet, or maybe if I did see him, maybe he was like disheveled and it wasn't obvious that it was him. But either way, so far, my general opinion is that it's got a lot of potential. It's promising. There's definitely things in here I like. Certainly, the feel of the show and the effects and the crazy moments feel like they do belong in the world of the boys. So that's very good. This episode sets up some interesting character things. But I will say a lot of this episode, which is Marie going out and spending an evening with some of the characters and her awkwardness of trying to fit in at the university. Some of that stuff did feel a little bit slow to me, and felt like it could have probably been a bit tighter and shorter, but it's not a big complaint in the grand scheme of things. And like I said, there's been seasons of The Boys that have started with a couple of slow episodes, but typically The Boys, once it kind of kicked into gear, it would do a great job with the pacing. And I think season 3, one of the reasons why I think season 3 is maybe my favorite of the seasons, is because it's actually the best pace. Like, it kind of hits that right from the get-go, more or less. I never felt that slow ramp up the way I did with season 2 and season 1, maybe. I say maybe because I don't really remember the pacing well enough at the start of season 1 to comment on it. Yeah, that's my general spoiler-free kind of thoughts. I'll get into the spoilers now for episode 1. That's all I've watched, so no spoilers for anything past that. We get this flashback for Marie, right? It's 8 years ago, and it's signposted really well in context of the universe because it starts with A-Train going into the 7, and they're making a big deal in the news about how it's the first black man to go into the 7. And we even get a cameo from Stillwell. They got Elizabeth Shue. They dragged her out of, not retirement, but wherever Elizabeth Shue hangs out for lunch, and they got her to sit down and do a little bit where she actually says that bringing A-Train onto the 7 proves what we've been saying all along, that we're living in a post-racism world. And I nearly spat out my drink when she said that. That's exactly the sort of like satirical thing that The Boys usually gets me with like just random comments like that. So we have like, this family, Marie and her parents and her sister, and Marie here is like 12, I think they said. And immediately, because it's Gen V, because this is a boys world show, I was thinking, oh, this is going to be her getting her power. But it's really neat because it is actually, I mean, it is that, but it's also her first period, right? And there's a really neat moment here where she goes off to the bathroom and the mom goes up to the door and says, "Are you okay?" She says something like, "I'm fine," and she's like really kind of nervous and she's trying to hide it. And the mum smiles because she knows it's her first period, and it's just a neat little thing that the mum just like gets the intuition that's what this is. The dad's oblivious; he doesn't know what's going on, and it's like, oh, this is a sweet moment, which is really effective in the right. This is why I think the opening is really strong, is because not only does it give you a nice swerve when the power manifests, because at first it's like, oh, it's just a period. She puts her fingers down and there's some blood on her fingers, and the mum smiles because, oh, this is sweet. My daughter's having her first period. That little moment of her smiling, like, does such a job. Like, it's such a, like, everything before it's fine, but her smiling at the door when she realizes that her daughter's going through her first period is such a humanizing moment that makes you sort of like both of them. It's the thing that makes you go, oh, this is actually a sweet little moment, which is what makes what happens next really effective, which is Marie accidentally kills both her parents with her power. Her power being to control blood with her mind, but she can't control it yet because she's never seen it before. She's never done this before. The blood that is coming out of her starts to come up in front of her and it starts to float around. And when the mum comes in the room, because she gets startled, the blood just sort of flies off like a dagger and goes through her mum's neck. And it's a really good looking moment as well. And she's on the floor and she's like sort of dying on the floor. And the dad comes up to try, and I was thinking, oh shit, this is going to be the dark backstory. She accidentally killed her mum. And what happened next is that when the dad's trying to check on the mum and asking what happened, Marie keeps getting freaked out, and she gets so freaked out that now the big pool of blood that's on the floor from the mum, she basically makes that all kind of explode like a grenade, where it's just all like, it's like shrapnel of blood, right? It's like it all turns into hard little bits and just like fires around the room. And that instantly kills the dad. And I'm like, holy shit, we're starting off with the bang, literally, in a lot of ways, a blood bang. And the little sister comes up last, and she doesn't get killed, she just sees her, and later, we don't see this next bit till later, but she says, oh, you're a monster, stay away from me. It's like, okay, that was a strong opening, it's a really interesting power, it's a really fascinating like way for it to manifest, is that because it's blood related. And yeah, okay, you could say, what, she hasn't like cut herself as a kid until this point. Well, maybe she did, but like maybe her powers have also only been active for a little while, like, or maybe they literally are just coming into effect with puberty. Possible. These are all possibilities, but the idea that it manifesting with, because so many times when you're looking at superhero media, often the superpowers are a analogy for being different or whatever, but sometimes they are an analogy just for growing up and coming of age. And it is, sometimes they can represent your kind of your sexual kind of awakening and desire. Sometimes, in the hit television show Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the whole idea of being the Slayer was just a metaphor for growing up and like taking on responsibilities, and how it's this burden you don't want but you have to accept it. Like, so the idea of the powers being directly tied to our first period and like growing up, and like the perceived horror that like, how do I phrase this? Because I know what I'm trying to say. The way that like society, in general, and especially more so in the past, even like would make it a faux pas to talk about this, and the jokes of like yesteryear where like men would be oblivious to what periods are and how they work because it was such a secret and no one wanted to talk about them, and the idea is something to be ashamed of that it's happening, but there's something that's happening to literally half the people on the planet, which so is the stupid, but but the fact that it's then tied to the idea that, oh, now you're becoming a woman, so that soon leads to the fact that you're going to be sexual and you're going to be doing all these things. The fact that they're tying the powers directly to this moment just feels like a perfect match in terms of themes and all that stuff. And especially the idea that she's now going to lie about this event to people later on. She's going to pretend she still has parents. When we cut ahead in time, she's in an orphanage and she's obviously learned to use her powers. She cuts her hand and she practices, which leads to a great shot, actually. She's in the gymnasium of wherever this orphanage is. And because she's fired out her blood at like different objects for target practice around her in a circle, the final shot looks down at the floor and there's like a perfect like sort of design of like blood, and it's like six like sort of, I don't know, lines of blood coming from this central circle on the middle of the gymnasium. There's like a circle design on the on the ground, or on the floor I should say, and so it makes kind of this almost like flower or star shape kind of thing. It's very pretty. It's a good moment of direction. Like I say, the opening of this is very solid. She then goes and like gets accepted. She checks her emails. I guess we established we're going to be making lots of sex jokes and stuff in this because there's like a ginger teenager who is just straight up watching porn in the common room of this orphanage. Like he's just watching like the Seven like porn parody. That it might even literally be the same clip we saw back when we saw some of this in season 2. I think it was season 2 because it was when Lamplighter was around. But if it wasn't the same clip, it was a very similar looking thing. So it's like, hey, you need to go to this place, but be careful. If you get kicked out, you're going to go to another place. You're going to go to like basically the superhero mental asylum. So and this is like her. The person who runs the orphanage is basically giving her this advice and saying, don't screw this up. Like, this is your path. You've got a scholarship. Stick to it and don't deviate. So, and it teases that another kid's been taken away in like a van, like men in white coats kind of thing, which, I think relates to something that's brought up again later. But yeah, so opening's very strong, which is why I went into detail there. I think all of it's very good in setting up this character, her powers. It sets up some of the world that we're in. All really good. Once we get to the college, the highlight for me definitely is the roommate. Like I said, I was a little bit worried early on. They introduce her. She's making like a YouTube video fighting like a hamster. She's got like a little toy wrestling ring and she's like shrunk down to be that size. But I did notice that when she meets Marie, she doesn't just like go big again in front of her. She goes into the bathroom and like comes out like she was in for a shower. She comes out like drying her hair, and it's like, okay, they kind of like glossed over that, like how she transforms, and obviously that's something that comes up later, which I'll just talk about now. I'll talk about her whole thing just now. So she makes a few crude jokes early on about threesomes. When they're watching Golden Boy do like a sort of, I don't know, amateur wrestling style contest with another superhero, she makes some jokes about him where she's like, I'd burn my tongue on his, I shouldn't say dick, but it's something to that effect. And then what was the other thing? Oh, he's like, again, she's talking about his dick, and she says, "Oh, I bet it's like a flaming cucumber." Which, okay, that one was a little bit funny, but it was like, oh, is this just going to be her thing? But almost immediately after this, when she takes Marie and they try and mingle with some other people who are in the arts courses, right? And it's people who have already been on TV shows and stuff like that. She gets a little self-conscious when they realize, oh, you're the one who has that YouTube show. And even though there's this one guy who's really enthusiastic about it, she gets a little embarrassed, and clearly that isn't what she wanted to talk about. Marie in the same scene, Chloe's like, oh, I don't want to be this at all. She's actually pissed that she's not in the crime fighting course. She didn't get into that course. So that's something we'll talk about. But this leads to later on when Marie's off doing the night out with the people. Emma ends up meeting this guy from this scene, this guy who liked her show and was very enthusiastic about her YouTube stuff. And when we come back to see them, like they're kissing, they're making out, they're getting on the bed, and it's like, okay, so she's found something to do with her night. Congratulations. But what's super interesting about this is that quite quickly he starts to ask her to shrink. He's like, hey, why don't you shrink down? Like, he says things like, I used to masturbate to her when he was younger, which, I mean, I guess is fine because they're both by the same age, but I'm like, she would have also been 14 when you were doing that, so thanks for that. But he says, no, it'd be so hot if you were tiny and you were hanging on my dick, kind of thing. So, and she's clearly uncomfortable when he starts asking for this, and she tries to pivot him from it, but he keeps kind of like going down that path. And this is what made me think the character had a lot more going on here, is that she's clearly uncomfortable by this, which is interesting in its own right. But then she like gives in. She doesn't like stand her ground. Like, she's so willing, so wants to be accepted, and so wants to, like, you know, like I'd probably have to see more of her to really like dig deep into like her motivations here beyond that. But she gives in to the pressure, and like we saw earlier, she doesn't transform in front of him. She sort of grabs some stuff and says, okay, I'll be right back, it'll take a minute. And she goes to the bathroom, and I'll be honest, see, when she kneeled down as if she was going to throw up, I thought what was going to happen is that she was going to throw up the small version of herself, and the big version of herself is basically just an empty drone while the little version's off doing things. And that was going to be the reveal. It wasn't that. It's just that it's this really unpleasant thing where she has to vomit to do it. And she vomits, and when she brings her head back up, she's like much smaller, and you know, we get some great shots of her kind of next to the toilet seat, and she looks really tiny. I think for me, this was just kind of this idea that she's having to basically do this thing that she doesn't see as fun. This is something she exploits. It's something that she's not ashamed of necessarily, although maybe she is, the way she reacted when they started bringing up her YouTube channel. But this idea that she's having to do this thing for this guy to please him, that, and we know she's really sexual. We know that she's, at least, maybe she's just talking the talk, but at the very least, all episode, she's been talking about threesomes and wanting sex and all these things, and then she's getting it, but it's sullied because this guy is kind of fetishizing her and saying, no, I only want you because you can be different in this way. And for her, this is not a sex thing to be this. In fact, it's very unpleasant to become this thing, and she has to give in and do it. And I think that idea of giving in because it's expected of her, the exploitation, you might call this, of her, I think is a really interesting dynamic and theme to be playing with. And of course, because it's a boys' universe show, we get the absolute ridiculous visual of what happens next. When we come back to them, they had this actress on some big cock. As best I can describe. I don't know how they did this. Obviously, there'll be some CG and trickery involved, but there is shots of her hugging, relatively speaking, and that comes up in the scene that it's only relatively big, is she's hugging his cock and kicking his balls when he asks, and he's like, hey, is this the biggest one you've ever seen? And she's like, well, relatively, technically it is. And he asks her to say it, and she says it to please him. She says it because it's what he wants, but she's clearly not enjoying any of this. And that's the other thing, you know, is that when he asks for her to change, she points out, well, we can't have sex when I'm changed. Like, I'm going to be tiny. Like, you're not going to be able to fit anything anywhere. It really shows that it's not this equal thing. It's not this equal pleasure for both of them. This is just him, not demanding, that's maybe too strong a word, but very much encouraging and pushing her to just do something for him. And we don't see the rest of the scene, but I don't get the impression that they then went on to have normal sex and that she got to have the pleasure she wanted. It seems like it probably did. Just if anything, like, okay, I feel horrible for having this thought in my head. I really do. But I thought at the end of the scene where she's on his penis, and towards the end of it, she slides down to the bottom and lands on his ballsack. I thought, because he kind of lets out a groan, I thought the sort of the final moment of the scene was going to be her being covered in a substance. I'll just say that. And I was almost pleasantly surprised that it just cut away. Right? I'm not saying I wanted it. I want to make that clear. I'm not saying I wanted it. But this was a ridiculous scene already, and I thought the way that you would just make it more ridiculous by the end is have him finish. Although maybe even though it's this comical, from the perspective of looking at her, even though it's just this comically big shaft, and it would just be like a flood of like white goo coming down on her, relatively speaking, maybe just the implication of what's actually happening would be enough to make it like too much for whatever. I don't even know if they bother rating things on Amazon. I mean, they do in other countries. In the UK you have to, but I do wonder if that would like make it like just like beyond an R rating, and they just like maybe they were told no, maybe they were told that's too much, and technically that's it's a cum shot technically. I mean, it's not really, because it's a big effect and it's just this stupidly large thing, and it would be like a shower. It would be the end of Ghostbusters with all the foam coming down. It wouldn't actually be the real thing, but it would be simulating it technically. So I guess that's why. Anyway, I've spent far too much time talking about this stupid dick scene. But needless to say, all of this, like the visual of her looking so disinterested as she's just sort of pretending to be into this, kind of said everything it needed to. And I think this idea of her actually being this very free-spirited woman, but finding these obstacles still, the insecurities that come with all this, and like her trying to live up to this image of herself, and the idea that that's even why she has a YouTube show. She's trying to project a version of herself that's something, and maybe I don't know. It's all very interesting, and I'm curious to see the progression of Emma as a character. So that's all very good. Like, credit to the show. This is a very boys thing, but credit to a show for making the character who has a scene where she's a tiny person hugging a big cock, and for her for that to actually lend a hand in developing her and making her a more layered character is part of what makes The Boys in general an impressive show. So I'm glad that type of thing, not this specific visual, but I'm glad that type of thing has made it over to Gen V. So yeah, back to Marie. So she's really pissed when she finds out she's not in Introduction to Crime Fighting, or whatever it was called. This is where she ends up meeting the Jordan character, because they're like the assistant for a fun guest star. We have Clancy Brown is the guy who runs this course. He's like, nah, you'll be fine in the entertainment course. That's most superheroes do that anyway. It's fine. You'll be good. So she's very pissed about that. But one of the critiques I was going to have, actually, or at least I thought I was going to have, is that right after this scene, it immediately goes to a scene where she's walking at night and a super is running from the police. And I thought, it's a bit convenient, because I assumed that this was going to lead to, she's going to help catch this guy with her powers, and that's going to maybe like make Clancy Brown change his mind. So I guess I'm saying it's a good thing that didn't cause that, because that would have felt really convenient that it was the very next scene. But she ends up using her powers to help slow down this super who's running from police. And then that's when Andre, who we did see earlier, he was with Golden Boy a little bit earlier, but he comes in and helps as well by hitting the guy with a dumpster or something like that. And he gets taken away, and the guy as he's been taken away is yelling about how he doesn't want to go back to the forest. He's scared to go back to the forest. But when we actually see him arrive where he's going, it is more like a mental hospital where he's a prisoner, and the forest that he was talking about is like the wallpaper on the wall outside his cell. The hallway's got like a forest painting or wallpaper across it. And it's probably not a big stretch to assume that the place that the kid that was taken from the orphanage earlier on is probably went here as well. That just makes a lot of sense, I think. And until they tell me otherwise, that makes sense to me. But because Andre takes a liking to her, he asks her to come out the next day with him, Golden Boy, and Kate, who's Golden Boy's girlfriend. They go and hang out on the top of the Seven Tower, and then they go to like a club to drink and stuff. And that this was where I was feeling the pacing a bit. I wasn't super interested in them in the top of the Seven building. I wasn't super interested in them faffing about, dancing and taking drugs. Like I just, that wasn't doing too much for me. Obviously, it does escalate at a certain point where Andre's trying to impress a woman at the bar, and he makes a little bird out of, I think, water or whatever the drink was, and he bets the woman that he can fly it over into this old guy's glass. And when he's doing this, and he's sort of slowly having it fly over, some guy bumps into him by accident, and he loses concentration, and the bird just like flies sharply to the side, and it slits a woman's throat. It's another example that we saw a lot in The Boys of like these supers being really just juvenile with their powers and being irresponsible, and people get hurt as a result of it. And you hope that, unlike say A-Train in season 1 of The Boys, is that characters in the show might actually learn from these mistakes, might actually feel guilty about it. We don't really get a good sense if Andre does feel super guilty. I mean, he does seem, he cares in the scene, like he's on his knees like holding her neck and trying to like help her. But Golden Boy and Jordan and the girlfriend are like, oh, we have to go right now, we can't be associated with this. So they grab him and go. So we don't get too much of a chance to hear what Andre's thoughts are, especially after some reflection time, how he feels about what he did. He does blame the guy that bumped into him in the moment, which is a natural reaction, I think, in the moment when you're like shocked that this has just happened. But I wonder if he still has that opinion later, because that would maybe where you start to like look at him worse as a person. You maybe start to judge him a bit more at that point. So I am curious to see how he reflects on this as we go. But Marie stays back, and she obviously has flashes back to her mum. It reminds her of that visual, similar wound, similar part of the body. There's blood squirting out, and she tries something that I can only imagine that she's been wondering if she can do this ever since that day her mum died. Like that question, could she save her mum? And this ties back into the opening very well, is that she uses her powers to stop the blood that's flowing out, and sort of like kind of pushes it back in, almost back into her system. So, and then like, I don't know if she necessarily heals the wound per se, but she does that and kind of stops the blood from coming out any further and basically saves the woman's life. And a lot of people at this point are filming, they're seeing it, it's on the social media stuff and all that. And, you know, all that's very good. And I thought, oh, maybe this will be how she gets into the class she wants. Clancy Brown's going to see this and be, you know, okay, you know what, you've proven yourself. In fact, one of the things he even said earlier on was that some of the other students in the class that have gotten into his class have literally already caught serial killers. So that's the competition she's up against to get a spot in this place. It's like, okay, maybe now that she's done this, and maybe they see how useful her power can be, it's not just that she can like throw bloody knives at people. She can actually heal or help wounds by like moving the blood back into the body, or at least stop it from leaking, things like that. Very interesting. And credit to the show, because I think it was very smart that they sort of made you think that that's what was going to happen, and then immediately he threw her under the bus and said, I'm going to have to expel you because these other, like, you know, spoiled rich kids with superpowers that you were with, like, they've all got futures, and they can't be associated and like seen to be leaving this woman left to die in a club, so you have to take the fall. And then he also just casually says that she did it as well. He implies that Marie herself cut this woman's neck, and points out that, hey, you're an orphan and you murdered your parents. You don't have really much of a choice here. And you can totally see how they're going to try and spin it. Even with the witnesses, they're going to say this is the exact same wound that her mother had. Like, you can already see the PR and the smear campaign coming up in your head. So she feels backed into a corner. She goes out and cuts herself. And I thought she was going to maybe even consider committing suicide with her own blood here. But instead, this is where she thinks of her sister calling her a monster. And it almost feels like at this point, and she already said to Golden Boy, actually, when they had a little moment on the roof, that she's doing all this for her sister. And then when you see at this point of the episode that her sister said, "You're a monster, stay away from me," I still believe her, but I think this recontextualizes it and says, no, a lot of this is about proving to her sister, and certainly to herself, that she isn't a monster, that she is better than that. You know, that gives you a nice, simple, neat thing for the character to be motivated for, and what her goal is, and what's driving her the whole time, and why she wants to be a hero. So yeah, all that makes sense. I think that's all handled fairly well. So yeah, that stuff's good. But she gets the strength and the courage to go back and speak to Clancy Brown's character. And at this point, I should probably mention that there was a scene in the middle of the episode where Golden Boy comes to see Clancy Brown, and Clancy Brown basically says, "You're leaving the university because you're going into the Seven. You're replacing one of the either Maeve or Starlight, because obviously they're both out of the Seven now." This was probably the most interesting scene for Golden Boy, at least until the ending, because he clearly was pretending to be happy about this news, but looked terrified about it. Whenever Clancy Brown wasn't looking at him, he was looking very concerned. So that was an interesting thing to raise. And here at the end of the episode, he goes in, and when Marie goes into his office and opens the door, Golden Boy has killed Clancy Brown by hugging him whilst he turns all of his flame powers on, and has just turned him into a charred corpse or something. And Marie sees it, and she tries to say that she won't tell anyone, but immediately Golden Boy's like, I wish you hadn't come in, Marie, and starts chasing her down the hall with his fire powers. And what's interesting is that Jordan, who's around at this time, earlier on kind of had a bit of an antagonistic attitude towards Marie, but here, when Golden Boy's coming after Marie, Jordan pretty much immediately starts trying to talk Golden Boy down and starts using their powers, because they start off in girl form, and then when Golden Boy goes to hit them, they transform into the male form, and it kind of this transforming in the fight keeps happening. And because I already had the impression from the gunshot thing earlier that they're invulnerable when they're in that moment of transition, I sort of took that as every time they transformed here, I was paying attention to when it was happening, because it felt like not every time, they definitely took a few punches. I don't know how, maybe they can't transform every second, maybe there has to be a little bit of a recharge time, but it seemed like for a lot of the big hits, the transformations were happening right as the hit or right before the hit was happening. So it did make me think about that. It's a really interesting thing to say. And certainly the commentary there, the idea, if this represents, a trans character in some way, the idea that they're at their most powerful when they're transforming is kind of an interesting message you might be sending with that. This idea that there's power in knowing that you are that, and that you do want to change. So again, you can kind of maybe see what they're doing with it. Again, I want to see more to see where they take some of these ideas to sort of have more of a firm opinion in what they're saying with them. But certainly there's an interesting, the game board's been set up, and a lot of interesting pieces are on the board as far as all this stuff is concerned. But yeah, so this fight goes on for a little bit, and it's pretty fun. Golden Boy's all fiery the whole time, and they're punching each other. Eventually they get out, and Andre's there, and Andre tries to talk Golden Boy down. And it's worth mentioning as well is that none of these other characters in the team, none of them seem to have been aware that Clancy Brown was going to let Marie take the fall for them. Because when Marie mentions it to Jordan right before the fight starts, they don't seem to know about it. It does take them by surprise. And I think Andre doesn't seem to know either. It seems like it's not something that they have decided to do to her maliciously. This seems to be someone with the power up the food chain has made this choice that they're going to just sacrifice her. and says, "Oh, you'll land on your feet. Yeah, you're going to a superhero mental asylum probably, but you'll land on your feet. You're resourceful." But yeah, at the end of the episode is Golden Boy looks around in horror that everyone's watching him because now there's a crowd around him, and he flies up and he flames on, he fires up into the sky, and then blows himself up with his powers, and we literally get this rain of blood coming down on everyone to end the episode, which was a great visual. I especially liked when it cut to Andre, the way the blood hit him. You could sort of just see this nice layer of blood because he's got kind of short hair, but it's kind of got a bit of a curliness to it, and you could kind of see the layer of blood on top of his curls. It looked really good, and then obviously everywhere else. I suppose technically, in a way, this was what I was maybe kind of expecting with the jizz earlier on. They sort of did it, and they subverted my expectations and did it with blood instead at the end of the episode. So, congratulations. So very good. And they had Ashley from The Boys put there's like a mid-credit sequence where Ashley says, "Hey, that's still the safest school in the country for superheroes and stuff." And then said, "This is your curriculum for the year," and that's when you get the sizzle reel for the season. So yeah, the ending's pretty strong. The opening 10 minutes or so are really strong, and I do think they set up some really cool stuff with the characters, and there was definitely things I was praising as I was talking about that there. But there was definitely some slow periods with Marie out with the other characters that just kind of felt like we were almost going through the motions a little bit just to get to the meaty stuff, like what we were really there for, and what the point of the end of the scene was going to be. And I get why we spend that time early on doing it, but there wasn't much more to it other than them convincing her to do things that she hadn't done before, and like the heart-to-heart she has with Golden Boy, which I guess makes you surprised that he's the way he is at the end. Maybe a little detail that's important is that right before Golden Boy tries to kill Marie after she's caught him with the professor, he does say something to the effect of, "You don't understand." I don't know if he says he built it or what, but he basically connects the professor to the forest, and he says the forest. And I think it's important that he said that. So, one, it gives us an idea that this professor is directly involved with this place locking superheroes up and whatever they're doing to them there. But also, it's important, I think, because Marie also heard that earlier. She heard, "They're going to take me back to the forest," or "I can't go back to the forest." She heard that with the guy that they took away earlier on, who by the way, might be Golden Boy's brother. I glossed over that because the scene was honestly kind of dull. But there's the scene where she's having the heart-to-heart with Golden Boy. He mentions that he has a brother who died, and I got the sneaking suspicion later on that when he brings up the forest, or I can't remember what made me think of it, but there was something later on that made me instantly think, oh, maybe that guy was the brother trying to come see him, and he just thinks he's dead, but he's actually at the forest. That said, though, he knows about the forest later on, but maybe he's found out, and that's why he's going to kill Clancy Brown's character. Maybe that's why he's upset. He's just found out about it. Or maybe he was in the forest at one point, or maybe he's just found out his brother has been there and been treated horribly, and that's why he's doing this. But that is probably an important detail. At least the part where Marie might be able to put two and two together and start to suspect that, oh, that's twice I've heard this forest mentioned. Maybe there's something we got to do with that. So. But no, so yeah, promising first episode. A lot of things in here I like. Definitely had a little bit of a pacing problem at points, but a lot of standout moments, a lot of great visuals, and ridiculous visuals as well, which is something The Boys is very good at. So, so far, obviously it's not reaching the heights of The Boys yet, but so far, the potential for it to be a very similar quality and do very similar things with how it uses all this craziness to actually say something about people seems very, very possible at this point. So I'll be looking at episode 2 in the next few days. I think Sunday's when I'll get a chance to actually look at it, but expect that sometime. And I'll get to episode 3 before the episode 4 review is due out next week. But I imagine these will probably be a Saturday thing after they come out. Starting with this one technically, but starting with episode 4, because 2 and 3 are going to be whenever before then. But that is me. You can, of course, let me know what you think of the first episode of Gen V in the comments. And of course, you can support all the content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and get some bonuses for your troubles, including a monthly bonus review of Columbo, if you're interested in that old show. I started reviewing it monthly just this past month. Also check out the reviews of The Boys, that are the playlists that are already on the YouTube channel, by all means. So thank you very much for joining me. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?